Predicting the future, the 7 megatrends that will transform the way we live. And Labor and the Greens enter a new era of negotiations. Is this the end of the climate wars? Welcome to Q&A. It's a very, very infectious and enthusiastic crowd tonight. So I'm Stan Grant. We're coming to you live from Melbourne tonight. And joining me on the panel, CSIRO Chief Executive Larry Marshall, Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy Jenny McAllister, writer and disability advocate Hannah Diviney, who's been making headlines around the world this week after her big win over Beyonce. We're going to come to you on that very, very soon. The Director of the Indigenous Forum at the Centre for Independent Studies, Warren Mundine, and South Australian Greens Senator Sarah Hanson-Young. Please make them welcome. And remember, you can stream us on iView, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Quanda, as usual, is the hashtag. Please get involved. Let's get to our first question tonight. It comes from Peter Somerville.
Thank you, Stan. The climate report outlines CSIRO's views of expected megatrends of the future. I've read the report, and my analysis is that it seems to be a result of brainstorming of options rather than being substantiated by serious, substantial science. Why am I wrong? The CSIRO, can you actually predict the future? Or are the recommendations of the report really based upon an exercise of the precautionary principle?
Larry.
Thank you. So we dream of science being able to predict the future, and we can certainly model it, and we can model different options. And it turns out that often we come very close to getting it right, but you absolutely cannot be certain of the future. But I'll just give you one example. In 2016, we hypothesised the chance of a disease we call disease X. So we made a lot of changes to CSIRO, including changing the role of our biosecurity lab, the only one of its kind in either the southern or the eastern hemispheres, and made it the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness. And so we were ready on the front foot when disease X turned out to be COVID-19. So that's an example of why using science to model the future is so important. But can we get it 100% right? No. But you know what? If we get it wrong and we've prepared for it, we're prepared for the next thing. But if we don't do it, then that's really bad.
Larry, so many of the mega trends that you've looked at sort of overlap in a lot of ways. There's climate change, leaner, cleaner and greener, the health imperative, geopolitical shifts and so on. What is the big challenge, do you think, that connects all of these dots?
Yeah, the big one is for Australia is our innovation dilemma. So we have a history of incredible ingenuity. We invented the solar design that's actually being used around the world to make solar panels. We invented Wi-Fi, which has been commercialised extensively around the world. But we don't back ourselves. We're sort of afraid to believe in ourselves. It's almost like the actors and actresses that need to go overseas and become famous before we recognise them here. But that's changing, and this is what really gives me hope. So Australian science created a solution to reduce 15% of the entire world's emissions, those that come from cattle. And this is it, it's called Future Feed. Now that's a gift that Australia has invented and created for the world to reduce emissions. But this time, Australian companies like Woolworths, universities like JCU and organisations like GRDC teamed up with CSIRO to make the science real and turn it into a series of Australian companies that employ our children for the future, to grow jobs and use innovation of science to solve a major problem. We need to do more of this, but for some reason we're a bit afraid to.
Peter, that's more than the precautionary principle, isn't it? That's trying to get on the front foot. Are you more satisfied or reassured after that answer?
Look, it's a very complex question. The precautionary principles is sensibly applied if you're trying to prepare yourself, as Larry has said. But as he said too, you can often be wrong. And the consequences of being wrong are also very serious. I actually have worked in agriculture for years, so I'm well familiar with the farting of cattle and sheep. And that's not an easy problem to solve, because you can come up with all these miraculous cures, if you like, but when it comes to actually applying them, and I've seen this happen time and time again in agriculture, they're very difficult to actually implement.
Yeah. I'll go to Jenny on this too. Just picking up on that point, you can prepare, Jenny, but it is difficult to meet all eventualities. And coming into power at this moment, when we have war in Ukraine, we've got potential economic recession or even worse facing us around the world, and of course there is so much uncertainty around climate and COVID as well. How do you prepare yourself for this?
What I like about Peter's question is he's really thinking about not just the science, but what do we do about it? And what I would observe about the report, which I'm actually a big fan of, is that it actually integrates decisions that humans are making with scientific analysis about the options and technologies and pathways available to us. Because the truth is, we're not really just trying to predict the future. The report asks us to think about how we will shape it. So, Stan, yes, as the report points out, significant geopolitical challenges, very significant resource constraints, including our carbon budget, big changes going on in terms of stresses to our health system. What I think they require is quite a sophisticated politics. And it's one of the things that I'm really interested in, is how do you get politics to engage with these hard and difficult questions. The truth is that almost nothing in the report produced by CSIRO can be reduced to a 3-word slogan. That's actually not an option for us in dealing with these big, complex megatrends.
We've got agreement already. I'll bring Sarah Hanson-Young in here, because it is interesting, Sarah, that we can prepare ourselves, but we live in a world of unpredictability, and it's a divided and very dangerous world. On the one hand, Larry talks about the need for climate change policies and a leaner, cleaner and greener future. We also face the prospect of potentially catastrophic war and countries spending more on their military right now, don't we? That's getting those priorities right in a world that is so complicated, where we have to rely on each other, and a world that is on the verge potentially of conflict makes it so much more difficult.
Absolutely, and I think Jenny's right when she says these issues are complex and politics has to step up as political leaders, as leaders in the community, as those of us concerned about these issues. We have to be prepared to engage properly, listen to the science, listen to the warnings that are coming forward, and look at the toolbox that we have as to how we deal with it. I think one of the key issues that overreaches all of these things is that there has been such a lack of trust and belief in the institutions that have traditionally managed these crises for us. And I think politicians have a lot of responsibility to take for that. I think what we need to be doing is increasing the level of positive engagement. Ideas that are put on the table, just because it might not be your idea doesn't make it a bad one. Opposition for opposition's sake is not going to help us through these issues. So we've got to learn to work together. We're not always going to agree, but one of the key things about having a genuine discussion with transparency, with the ability to challenge ideas, is often you'll get better solutions anyway, because no one has the solutions to everything.
Opposition for opposition. Well, I might have to hold you to that. We may be getting some discussions a little later where we may see some opposition for opposition's sake. But Hannah,
I hope not. I genuinely hope not.
Yeah.
I think people need to put that aside and work out how we work together better.
Hannah, what does the future look like from your perspective?
Well, after reading the CSIRO report and talking to my friends and basically seeing the reactions of everyone I follow on social media who's young and very worried about our future, it looks pretty damn terrifying. Because if we make one wrong move, that's it, game over. And it doesn't, we can talk about all the complex problems in the world, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again, none of that matters if we don't actually have a planet to live on. So I feel like that should probably be the first and biggest priority. And obviously, like, with conflict and everything, there's a lot of nuance to that conversation that's not going to be solved in one day. It's not going to be solved in a year. It's going to take lots of work. But I think part of what has to happen is young people have to feel like they're part of the conversation, because we're the ones that are going to be left with whatever does or doesn't happen now.
Well said.
How do I come up after that one?
Yeah.
Because I'm in that technology stuff, so that's my career, my life for the last 30 years. I believe, and in that report they actually talk about technology is our friend and how we can move forward on it. I'm also a great believer that, and I've seen it happen, where when the politicians are stuck in the mud and not moving forward, you can actually go around them. and you actually can get things happening.
Hell yeah, you can.
Oh, I've built a career out of it, actually, yeah. And so I'm very optimistic about the future. I'm very optimistic about what we can achieve and what we can do. But we do need the politicians, and I just said get out of the way, because they set the environment. They set what happens in that environment, and so we've got to work with them. We've got to get them to listen. And to me, it's not rocket science. You just look at what's happening. You see what's got to be done, and we've got the technology to do it. We've got the technology today to do it. It just needs the courage of people to get out there and do it.
We're going to get a lot more of your questions on the CSIRO report a little bit later. Now we'll turn to the question of climate, and of course that was one of the priorities that Larry looked at as well. It comes from Ross Kroger.
The transition to renewable energy in Australia is estimated to cost $500 billion. Australians pay $215 billion a year in income tax. So that's almost 2.5 years of the total income tax take to become renewable. And you can bet the cost to blow out significantly. The question is, how can we afford to do this? For our 1% of carbon emissions will have a minuscule effect on global warming.
Jenny McAllister.
Thanks for the question. You are right to point to the fact that this is a really big undertaking. There's a Deloitte report out in the last week which sort of suggested that this was a transformation on the scale of the Industrial Revolution, but we're being asked to do it in about half the time. I think the thing is that we have business ready to go. Warren spoke just now about people going around the politicians. We've had 9 years of stasis with a government that was unwilling to do almost anything at all about climate change. And in that time, the Australian business community has just been wanting to get on with it. During that period of opposition, I sat on a lot of committees and we did a lot of work around climate and the energy system, and businesses would come before us, and what they said to us was, we just need some certainty. We are ready to invest. We have the capital to deploy, to make this big transformation that you speak of. But what we need is certainty and a clear sense about direction. And it's why the vote today in the House of Representatives matters so much, and it's why we did want to put our targets into legislation. We've got the opportunity to bring together all of those smarts, all of those clever business people, all of those people in the community of goodwill who have wanted for so long to get us on the path of towards a low carbon economy. And bringing the Parliament together to do that today was enormously significant.
On the question of certainty, just some news that's come out today. For the first time in Australian history, a federal Environment Minister has set the wheels in motion to reject a coal mine. The Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek, proposing to reject Clive Palmer's Central Queensland coal project on the grounds that it will damage the Great Barrier Reef. So is this what the period we've entered into now, where it's going to be so much more difficult, if not impossible, for any funding for any fossil fuel projects going forward?
You're right. The Environment Minister has made what I believe is described as a proposed decision or a proposed determination, and she's put her reasons in the public domain. It's probably not appropriate to comment on that because it now is open to consultation and it's a process that needs to be through.
It does raise the question, though, that you raised of certainty, and if there are companies there looking for the sort of certainty, if they're going to be trying to develop projects and so on, is this an indication of what they should expect?
You can be quite certain that the government will proceed in a lawful way, and I don't want to comment on where the Environment Minister's decision might be going. She's stepping through a process as it's laid out in the legislation. It's under the EPBC Act. We do need, though, to set a clear direction on the broader point, and that's what the legislation today was all about. I got to be present on the day when the Prime Minister, Prime Minister Albanese and Minister Bowen were together and signed the letter to the UNFCCC saying that we were planning to update our contribution and our commitment. And to walk into that room and to see that, you know, Jennifer Westercott from the Business Council, Sally McManus from the Australian Council of Trade Unions, Kelly O'Shannessy from the Australian Conservation Foundation, all those different groups were there, ready to go, felt like such a moment because we have the capacity now to bring the country together and get on this journey.
Sarah Hanson-Young, the Greens, of course, wanted much greater reductions than Labor was proposing, but in the end, you did compromise. Why was that? Does it go to your point before that this is a time for negotiation rather than opposition?
You're right. 43% is not enough of a reduction.
Not the 70%.
Yeah, it's not enough of a reduction if we're going to keep temperature at the level that we've committed to under the Paris Agreement and that science is telling we need to stop dangerous global warming. And our proposal is for a 75% reduction because that's in line with the science. However, this is a step along the way, but what we really need to do, Stan, is stop making climate change worse. And so the point around new coal and gas is a very, very important one. So the Minister today has made a provisional decision in relation to not allowing a new coal mine to open, Clive Palmer's coal mine. That's a good decision. Well done to the Environment Minister. It was the right thing to do. We have such a challenge in front of us now to be reducing the pollution that is already in the system and is being created. You don't make the job any easier by opening up new coal and gas, new fossil fuels. You don't pour more petrol on the fire when you're trying to put it out. It's as basic as that, but how we do it and how we get there, we are going to have to work together. And that's why the Greens came to an agreement with the government. We've negotiated to strengthen their piece of legislation. It's a better piece of legislation today that passed the House than it was 3 weeks ago. I'm very proud of the role the Greens have taken in that. But bet your bottom dollar, we're going to fight tooth and nail to stop new coal and gas.
What does that mean going forward, Warren? Was it a good decision today, this provisional decision from Tanya Plibersek? And what does it mean, given that there is a legislated floor the government is talking about now? It's that it's not a ceiling, their target, it is a floor. What does it mean for future fossil fuel projects?
Well, it does mean that there is a change. And I'd like to congratulate the Greens because what they did today was a very mature approach, which in the past they didn't do. So I thought you did a great job today.
Thanks, Warren.
Whether you agree with it or not, I thought it was a very mature.
Thank you.
I had to get that in. Yeah. And sensible decision.
Here comes the but.
Here comes the but.
Look, the problem that I have, as I said, I've been in the energy industry for 30 years, covering renewables, gas, and nuclear, and I just what frustrated me a lot, and probably frustrated a lot of us here, was that we didn't really have a transition process in place. And we should have had it ages ago, about how we shifted across. Because when I was in the gas industry in the 90s, we saw that was going to be happening, so we should have been preparing and shifting over that 20, 30-year period. But it wasn't done. We had these stupid internal fights. We had all these crazy stuff that was going on. Now, and one of the most sensible things I've seen happen on the global stage, especially after Glasgow and that, was the nuclear stuff.
Can you hold that thought? Yeah. Because you have led us right to our next question. It comes from Alex Agiropoulos.
Yeah. Nuclear energy accounts for approximately 10% of the world's electricity. Given growing geopolitical uncertainty and a need to find alternatives to fossil fuel, many countries have recently invested in nuclear energy. This includes the UK, who recently announced the construction of a new plant in China, and China, who has committed to building 150 reactors by 2035. Given this, and the fact that Australia is the most uranium-rich nation on the planet, how can we continue to justify the current ban on nuclear energy?
As you were saying.
Well, I think it's a ludicrous ban. I know why it was done in the politics of the day. In regard to the GST, that was the background to it, about how they got the Democrats, the Australian Democrats, to come to the table and agree to it. But I think, and because all the arguments back to me in the last few years had been about economics. They say it's too expensive. Well, my argument back to them, then you shouldn't be afraid to lift the ban, because no one's going to do it because it's too expensive. And actually what I'm finding in the industry now, because I declared my interest, I'm on the board of a uranium company that's registered on the London Stock Exchange, and we do uranium mining and also nuclear production, nuclear energy production stuff. And I can tell you, since Glasgow, we've been knocked over by countries around the world asking us what is it going to for us to ramp up our production, for us to get more mining happening, is just going for the door. We just can't keep up with that, and it's happening on a global stage. And you look at China. We've got things China, Japan, Korea, England, Britain, and a number of other countries that have come to us and saying, we want you to do this stuff. I just find it really interesting. And look, you look at Germany, for instance. Germany was the picture boy of renewable energy. And it turned out that they were lying. Anyone in the industry knew they were lying. They said they're getting rid of coal. They said they're getting rid of gas. They said they're getting rid of nuclear and all that. And guess what they were doing? They were buying gas and coal from the Russians. Yeah, and then look what Australia's doing at the moment. We've had to come out and go to fossil fuel to help us not get into blackouts and all these other things. So I just find it strange that a lot of other countries in the world have seen the light and actually moving ahead and creating more nuclear power and nuclear energy, and we're sitting here on a ban.
Do you feel like that's because we don't, like, as a collective, understand what nuclear energy is and like what it can do? Because I don't know about you guys, but whenever someone mentions like nuclear energy, I just think of like big red buttons and Chernobyl and just disasters. So if someone could explain to me how nuclear energy is going to be the way forward,
we have a scientist with us, Hannah. I think he might be raising his hand as we speak.
So I'm a physicist, so I can absolutely explain it to you, but I'll put everyone to sleep.
My wife's a physicist.
Can I separate this into two things? And to the original question, Australia is 1% or 1.4% of the world's emissions. That's not the point. The point is the whole world has to solve this problem. We have to stop the effects of climate change, and they're going to be with us until next century. regardless. So we do have to stop.
I know you want to get to nuclear. I know Hannah desperately wants that answer.
No, it's all right.
But you did identify, Larry, the idea of the impact of geopolitics, and the fact of the matter is that China is building more coal-fired power stations. That other countries are doing that. And if we're going to move on that, you need cooperation between the big powers, don't you?
Very much. But with respect to the question of nuclear, so let me separate that into two bits.
From little things, big things grow.
That's right. Good song too.
That's
good
my
song.
general life philosophy, Stan, and I think that's the life philosophy that we need to have, that even if Australia is only 1%, if we get the ball rolling, the ball will just keep rolling.
Yeah.
And Hannah,
But you
that's the
hit the question on. You've raised the biggest question that and bell the cat, as they say, and that is. We need to talk about it, and we need to educate people about it.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, whether we do it or not, at least people are doing that from an educated position.
Well, we've got an educator here. So.
So look, as far as our energy needs, we don't need nuclear to solve our climate change problem. I'm not ruling anything out, but when you have as much solar and wind resource and as much land as you have in Australia, you don't really need the nuclear option for your own energy. But the question of climate change is a global challenge, and there's lots of other parts of the world that do need nuclear because they don't have solar assets, they don't have enough land, they don't have enough sunshine or wind. And those countries largely are looking at nuclear as an option. And a really challenging question for us is, what do we do with all of our uranium? And do we do what we do with everything else? Do we ship it as a raw commodity and then buy it back 10, 100 times the value? Or do we do something to it to add value to it in this country?
Can I bring Sarah in? Yeah. The argument is often made, Sarah, that here is a cleaner form of energy that even in the transition phase may be useful looking at. Is there any circumstances in which the Greens would look again at nuclear? Because certainly Peter Dutton has said that that's part of what they're looking at now in the opposition.
Yes, but I think the Peter Dutton and his opposition seem all over the place on climate policy right now. So, on the Conservative side of his party, they're talking about nuclear. On the moderate side, they're trying to work out...
Well, sadly, there's no one here to defend themselves in that position today. We did make invitations, but unfortunately no one was available. But we will come back to the question about nuclear.
I'm happy to answer the question of nuclear. Would be good if the opposition actually had some type of climate policy, however. The point in relation to nuclear, though, is it is massively expensive. It is not timely enough for Australia's response, and in fact, Australia's contribution to the world's response on climate action. The CSIRO, Larry, of course, have put out a report, Gen Cost report, which clearly shows that nuclear power is at least 3 times more expensive than renewables, even when you factor everything in. And we have less than a decade to go to reduce pollution in this country and around the world to actually tackle dangerous global warming. We don't have time to waste. We don't have time to wait around for another decade that maybe, hopefully, some type of nuclear power station could be built. And I hear the cries from those in the Liberal Party right now, and I say to them, well, you tell me which town, which suburb do you think this nuclear power station should be built, and I'll come to that town and I'll debate you, because I bet your bottom dollar that clean, renewable power with storage will be cheaper for everybody's power bills, quicker to do, and will actually solve the climate crisis.
Warren and then Jenny.
I argue the point on cost. If you look at the cost, then how come Germany and Denmark, the most renewable countries in Europe, have got the most expensive electricity? And you look at France, and France has got the most cheapest electricity. So everyone raves on about the cost.
It's also a question.
I'm an investor, right? I'm an investor, and I got other people who invest. And I tell you what, there is big bucks to be made on those investments. So if it was so bad, then why aren't people investing, and why are people looking at this area, and why are, and I'm waiting for Larry to come, why is the countries with nuclear energy got cheaper electricity
There's
if
also,
it's more expensive.
I do want to come to Jenny.
Because at the end of the day, the consumer only cares about what they're paying.
The CSIRO have looked at the cost. They say it's at least 3 times the amount. So if you're paying, you know, up to $1,000 on your quarterly bill right now at home, Jesus, that's going to be a very expensive electricity bill by the end of it. And you wouldn't have solved
I
the
just proved
climate crisis.
My case was, if you go to the OECD figures, you go to the UN figures, France, all these people who have nuclear power have cheaper electricity
but Warren,
than the other countries.
But Warren, we don't here in Australia, and it's going to take at least...
Yeah, because we don't have nuclear.
At least a decade. It's going to take at least a decade, and if that. A lot of the technology that they're talking about...
You know how long I've heard that for 50 years?
Well, and it's still not here. And it's still not here.
You keep
and
on saying it'll
solar
take 10
panels,
years, it'll take 10 years.
battery storage, renewables is powering... You know, I come from South Australia. There are days when renewable energy powers almost 100% of our electricity generation. It can be done. It is being done. It's good for the climate. It's good for people's electricity bills. We need the government to set the direction and say, go ahead and do it.
Well, and that's a question for the government, because it also raises the question, doesn't it, when you have renewables at the moment, fossil fuels contributing to about 60% of our electricity supply. And you mentioned South Australia, of course, we've seen blackouts. We've seen blackouts in other places as well. Is there the option for nuclear in that transition phase, backup phase? Are you prepared to look at that again?
We don't have time to wait for a nuclear debate to take place. So I think Mr Dutton said that there needs to be a conversation. I think our view would be it would have to be a very quick conversation, because we've got all of the information before us saying that the cheapest form of new electricity is solar and wind, even when you take into account the things that you have to do to firm that. And I actually just... I dispute Warren's, I guess, diagnosis about what's gone wrong to date, and also sort of don't share your pessimism, Warren, about what it can look like in the future.
I'm not pessimistic, I'm an optimist. I'm very much an optimist.
Okay. Well,
but on the renewables front, I mean, the reason that we're facing some real challenges this winter is actually because there's been very limited investment in new capacity in the system over the last 9 years, because there's been 22 different energy policies from the then Liberal government. And it's meant that 4 gigawatts of capacity has exited the system and only one's come in. We need to create some certainty so people can start investing in these new technologies, which we know work and we know can power our
we are
future.
going to have to move on, Sarah.
I just want to say, part of the issue is, of course, the gas companies are gouging everybody right now and ripping off the consumers. They're making massive profits. It all goes overseas. They're not paying enough tax. With so much stuff we've got to do right now to get the energy and the renewables back on track.
You certainly got them talking, Alex. I don't know whether you're convinced one way or the other, but you've certainly got a discussion going. Our next question comes from Toby Heiniger.
I don't know how to go from that to Beyonce, but my questions are about Beyonce just released her new album, and there's a song on there that uses an ableist slur. She's since apologised. She's since changed the wording of the song and re-released it. My question's to you, Hannah. Artists like Lizzo and Beyonce, when they do things like this, do you think it's good enough that they just apologise, quickly make a change and re-release that song?
I was waiting for this. They warned me it was coming and I was still waiting. So, look, I really wish, obviously, that they hadn't released the song with the slur in the first place. That would mean I wouldn't have had, and so many other disability advocates wouldn't have had to expend our emotional labour explaining why the slur is not cool and why it should be taken out. And it would probably also mean that my Twitter mentions weren't as much of a dumpster fire as they are right now, but that's okay. Look, I really respect Lizzo and Beyonce for apologising. I think that's a great move, because I think we have definitely seen it before when celebrities do that whole I'm going to double down. That's not what I meant. You just took it the wrong way, blah, 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 blah. And both of these women who, it has to be said, occupy incredible spaces as marginalised people themselves, have shown everyone around the world how to be an effective ally. And that's basically be open to learning, go, okay, cool, I did something wrong. Now I'm going to just fix it and we're not going to make a huge fuss about it. I just wish the people who are really passionate about the fact that Beyonce and Lizzo had to change the lyrics in their song would get that message, because I actually debated whether or not to bring this up, because I have a lot of people that I care about watching and people who care about me, and they don't quite know the level of trolling I've got this week. But I have had people basically sending me photos of, or like GIFs of people in wheelchairs falling over, people in wheelchairs being pushed off cliffs, you know, all that kind of stuff, which basically is telling me to shut up and go away. But luckily, I'm not very good at listening to that, so.
Good on you. Sorry to hear that. Good on you. Hannah, when you hear something like that, and you were very generous and gracious in talking about Beyonce and taking it down, but when you hear something like that, what is the feeling? What is the reaction?
The feeling in the Beyonce case was a lot of confusion and a lot of hurt that I think went deeper than Lizzo, because I couldn't work out how she'd missed the conversation we had 6 weeks ago, because it kind of went round the world. And I wasn't really sure how someone on Beyonce's team missed that memo that if they kept that word in the song, they were going to run into the same problem. I don't know if they thought, like, she's called it out once, she won't dare call it out again. But trust me, I can and I will every time. So I think it's just a lot of frustration, confusion, hurt. That particular word has been used against me before as an insult and is especially being used against me now. It's been used against people I care about, and it presumes like a lack of intelligence or emotional control, which is not at all things that I want associated with me, things I want associated with my disability. They don't reflect on my life at all. And trust me, if people had to actually live with spasticity, I don't think they'd be using that as an insult, because it hurts.
Toby, are you particularly a Beyonce fan, or?
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
Huge, of course.
Did that change your view of her music when you heard that word? And we don't want to repeat that word because it's completely unnecessary to repeat it. But when you heard that,
yeah, I think the same as Hannah as well. I was confused because we all just saw what happened with Lizzo, and I just thought there's not a chance that no one in her team, she worked with so many people, and not one person stood up and said, hold up, you don't use that word. It baffles me, and I still love her, but, you know, it does, you know, it takes its toll.
It also goes to representation, doesn't it? Can I bring Jenny and Sarah in here as well? Sarah, you know, you look around at the lack of representation in Parliament, and the Greens are the only person with someone with a visible disability, Jordan Steele-John, in the Parliament, and I think the point was made by you, Hannah, about the minister and who the minister is, and that the minister doesn't actually represent your community.
See, when people have to make decisions about marginalised communities, it's my view that the person who's making the decisions should probably be a part of that marginalised community. Just a hunch that maybe lived experience should count for something. And I think, while obviously there are multiple barriers to people with disabilities' political participation, the fact that there is only one senator in the whole of the history of Australian Parliament who has had a visible disability, and the fact that they then had to make changes to Parliament House that they weren't making before, shows me just how far we have to go. Now, that's not to say that other parliamentarians don't have invisible disabilities or disabilities that they haven't disclosed, but obviously we can only act on what we know, and what we know is Jordan Steele-Johns is the only disabled parliamentarian. And I think all of that comes down to the fact that, like, people with disabilities don't see themselves anywhere. There's two narratives you get taught about as a disabled person growing up. One of them is Paralympic excellence. It happens every 4 years. These people pop up and they do a great job. I am as much a fan of Dylan Alcott, Kurt Fernley, all of those guys as anyone else. I think they're incredible. But newsflash, not every disabled person is good at sport. Not every disabled person wants to go to the Paralympics. Not every disabled person could have a hit with Dylan Alcott and come away with a silver medal. The other narrative we get is a narrative of tragedy. How many times have you guys seen like a drink driving or a speeding ad where basically the thing they want to show you to deter you from doing that is a person in a wheelchair who thinks their life is over?
Wow. Hannah, I think you've just created a whole lot of thought right now across the country. I really do. And that is the kind of leadership that we need to hear from people who have lived experience. It's one of the reasons why I think, and I know Senator Steele-John is pushing for this quite hard. There's a couple of vacancies at the moment in relation to the NDIS, the chairperson and the CEO. Those positions should be being actively filled by people with lived experience so that they can show that leadership. And I just want to say one of the best things from my experience and my learning in relation to people's watching vicariously through the lived experience is being there with Jordan in the Parliament and having to see how he still has to navigate just physically the place, let alone emotionally and socially when people, simple things like when we have to stand to speak, he can't get the President's attention. We're often having to kind of wave and say, well, Jordan has something to say. Across the board, it's every day there is another challenge. And having somebody with lived experience right there next to you is a very good way of teaching the rest of us.
Jenny?
I wanted to say thanks for your intervention now and over the last couple of weeks, because that is really powerful.
Yes,
and
I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, it means a lot. I think we are going through a really interesting, big public discussion, and it's been important in the Parliament, but also, of course, it's been important in the community. A big discussion about who is represented and how, and who occupies authority and who gets to speak. It's been one of the most interesting and transformative conversations that I've witnessed in an adult life, where I have been quite interested in politics since, leaving school. The lived experience of a whole range of people who have not previously been represented is immensely important. I know Labor actually went to the election with a range of things that we hoped to do in relation to the NDIS. One of them was to return lived experience to the centre of its administration, in board, in senior executive positions. And you're right that there are vacancies there at the moment, and the Minister, Bill Shorten, is going through a selection process, but he's been very clear that he wants to see lived experience reflected more strongly.
That will be reflected? There is a likelihood, do you think, that someone will be appointed to those positions with lived experience?
He's going through a proper process of selection, but he's made it very clear that lived experience matters, and there's a range of opportunities to introduce it into the administration of the NDIS, and I know that the Minister is looking at those. More particularly, though, the whole system needs to be more responsive to the people who are using it.
Yes, please.
It was established to offer choice and control, and over recent years, those features of the system have been eroded.
You've led us through our next question. Thank you.
My apologies.
Hannah, thank you so much for what you said there as well. But we will go to our next question. It comes from Shirley Glantz.
Hi. I'm a person living with polio from the age of 14 months, and I'm the president of Post Polio Victoria, an advocacy organisation here in Melbourne. Why do people with a disability always have to explain their disability and justify their existence? Why is it that those with polio and other disabilities that are over the age of 65 have been excluded from accessing the NDIS and are not receiving adequate care via the aged care system? Our parents were assured that we would be looked after, but what's going to happen to us now?
Jenny.
One of the things Bill Shorten, the Minister, has wanted to talk about with the disability community is the adequacy of all of the other pieces of the system. You're right that you shouldn't have to explain, and people with disability shouldn't have to explain themselves and their circumstances over and over again. And I know that Bill's quite concerned that many of the pieces of our support systems don't respond adequately to people with disability. To return to that question of centring lived experience and centring the experiences of people with disability and also some of the insights from their carers, we are really looking to return that original essence to the NDIS. There's a lot of work to do. It's been run down over time, and some really unhelpful, unnecessary constraints on the operation of that organisation have, I think, made it a really unhappy and difficult experience.
There's a very specific ask here, though, and that is that, you know, why is it that those over 65 have been excluded from accessing NDIS? Is that not something that can immediately be done? Is that something you'd like to see?
That's what,
immediately
in a perfect world, what we would like is that people over 65 be included with a disability, be included in the NDIS, particularly those like myself who have lived from the age of 14 months with polio. Why do I have to justify that I cannot get into, that I have a disability, and I have to prove each time that I have a problem, and not a problem, this is my life, and I'm not going to get better. I don't want to be asked, are you feeling better today? Sorry, I'm actually feeling a lot worse today. It's not only for myself, I know my MS colleagues and people with other neurological conditions, they're not going to get better. So why are they being shoved into nursing homes when they should be at home being cared for? Through the NDIS was set up for people with disability, and it shouldn't be restricted to an age.
But you shouldn't have to wait for a perfect world to fix that.
No,
that should be able to be fixed.
Well, Jenny, it does come to that very specific question. That's something that can be done now, couldn't it?
I think the point, if Minister Shorten were here, I think he would say is that we want all of our systems to be responsive to the people who present to them. And so whether that's the school system or the aged care system, all of these systems need to be responsive to people as they present.
But they're two different packages, NDIS and aged care. If you're in aged care, it doesn't mean that you're old. What about people in aged care who have a disability? Are they getting what people get in the NDIS package? No, they're not.
We've got to remove that 65 age group barrier.
And we're trying to ask people to work to, you know, the retirement age to be raised. Then why not raise the age of getting into NDIS? And secondly, when it was rolled out, it was unfair if you were living in postcode 3000 or 3165, right? And it was across the road. You got in, they didn't. Is that fair? It was rolled out across the country by postcode. That's not fair.
Thank you, Shirley, and certainly that's going to be on the agenda, as you say. I appreciate that, Shirley. Thank you. Let's go to our next question. It comes from Dominic Kenny.
Thanks, Dan. My question is for Larry. You say artificial intelligence will literally consume many of the jobs that we know today. Which industries should young people seek for job opportunity, and which industries do you predict will prosper and plummet first?
So it's true that a number of groups, including us, have tried to figure out which jobs will go. And I think what we realised is the key is in the seventh megatrend, which is unlocking the human dimension. So in CSIRO, like most places, our people had a bit of a fear of artificial intelligence. Will it replace my job? Will I lose my job? What we learnt is so even scientists have this fear. So what we learnt is that innovation is driven by collaboration. And when you collaborate with machine intelligence, you get something much better than either one would have done alone. That human power of creativity, that human power of diversity of experience really unleashes the full potential of AI to solve the problems that we want to solve. The thing about AI, though, it's like a child. It only knows what we teach it. So if we're not careful, we'll teach it all of our bad habits. And that's why the government tasked CSIRO to come up with an ethics framework, a bit of a roadmap for AI, and now to create a national AI network so we can bring all of that brainpower together responsibly so that when Australia deploys AI, it's done ethically, responsibly, it can be interrogated, and the public can actually trust it rather than just letting it run willy-nilly.
But we're talking not just about the ethics of it. You were speaking specifically about jobs as well, Dominic, weren't you? And when you look at it, Larry, so many jobs are going to disappear. People who drive vehicles, for instance. It's often the poorer part of communities, people who are not earning as much, who are going to be most affected. I know you've talked about the need to focus on the jobs of tomorrow, not the jobs you're losing. But if you're losing a job, what do you say to those people?
Oh, look, it is awful when anyone loses a job. But again, what we found in CSIRO, so we automated a number of processes that were previously done by technicians, so fairly simple processes. But those people didn't go. What we found was once we freed them from literally pipetting tubes, so we started doing that using automation. Once we freed them from that labour, it gave them time to actually work on the insights from all of that data collection, to actually work with the data. So similarly on properties, as you automate things, people don't have to do them anymore. It's a choice of every business owner. You can actually move those people to do higher value tasks, and you will get more from having them involved than you will ever get just letting the machines do it for you. Even Toyota discovered this.
You feeling optimistic about those jobs, Dominic?
Yeah, I just, do you think that'll work for all jobs though? Like you're saying, we can navigate, once AI comes in and starts, getting involved in people's work, we can transition and find them new jobs in that same sector. But is that going to work for everyone?
It obviously depends very specifically, but it's hard to find a role where the human's lived experience, to your point actually, lived experience, doesn't make the artificial intelligence smarter, because AI is not very smart. It's only as smart as we teach it to be.
So it's joint. It's a
collaborative intelligence. That's the key.
Can we get to our next question? It's a video question. It comes from Natalie Yeaman in Townsville.
Sovereignty was never ceded. There's no bill of sale of our land. Wouldn't treaty be a genuine commitment to the voices of First Nations people of our country?
Warren.
Yeah, I thought I'd get that question.
Surprise.
You've been a proponent of treaties.
I know, I've been a long...
We've discussed.
We got a confession here. We went to uni together and...
no more. No more.
I won't tell you the rest of the stories unless you take me out for a beer.
I was a lot younger than Warren.
Anyway, what was it? Oh, yeah, the treaties.
Flashbacks to university.
Yeah, come back to university. I've always been a very strong supporter of treaties virtually all my life, and I think because I come from it's a very simple notion. It's very much our culture, as Stan and I know, is that only only the traditional owners of that country can speak for that country. And whether you agree with them or not.
That's just lived experience again, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Only they can speak for it. I'll tell you, like we had this discussion earlier, I'm a very strong nuclear energy person. But when the community at Ranger said, we're going to close it, the media come to me thinking there's going to be a fight. And I said, no, that's their country. They make their decisions. And that then leads on to the treaty process. They need to be able to talk for their country and come to arrangements for their country. And that's why I've been a very, very strong treaty person in regard to that, yeah.
Let's get to our final question of the night, and it comes from Hannah Moore. Hannah?
Well, has anyone actually looked past the 10-year deadline to when my generation is in positions of power? With your current plan, will my generation even reach 50? Younger generations don't trust the government. We just think it's a massive joke. So why should we put our little remaining faith into something that may not even help us in the long term? What then? Why should we trust it or you?
Jenny? Oh, yes.
Can I just ask how old you are, Hannah?
13.
Okay.
You're going to take over and you're 23. Oh, my God.
Wow.
We may be in better hands, Warren.
You go, sister.
Jenny?
Yeah.
Hannah, that is such an important question, and it's possibly the question. Politics has to respond to the things that young people are asking it to do. And over the last couple of years, young people have been out on the street making it really clear from a very young age that they've been dissatisfied at the adequacy of the government's response, the previous government's response on climate. One of the things that I think about the reforms that went through the Parliament this week, that they're actually a democratic reform as well as an economic and an environmental one, because the Parliament must show people, particularly young people, that it's going to respond to the things that are expressed as a priority.
Hannah, is it just one party or another? Is it just politics in general?
Politics in general is biased. They're trying too hard to please themselves or please everyone, and in the end, often it just leaves us wanting. And you're saying, hey, maybe that was the last party. How do we know this one will be any different? Will there be any form of change?
Well, they've got 3 years to prove it, and then you'll get a chance to vote, not in the next election, but in the one after that. Larry, what can you offer as a scientist looking to the future, looking at your megatrends, for some optimism for Hannah looking to the future?
So Hannah, what do you want to do when you leave school, or what is it?
I want to go into zoology, but honestly, at the rate we're going, might not be any animals left to study.
So you want to do science?
Yes.
Which is fantastic, because scientists will invent the solutions to these problems that we're facing.
No biases there. No biases there.
I know the future looks bleak. I know that, but look at what we've just done as a nation. We were able to not just get vaccines made overseas accelerated into testing in under a year, and Australia had a huge role in that at the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness, but we're also able to manufacture 50 million doses.
Turns out when we really care about something, we can do it pretty quick, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah.
When we collaborate. So Hannah, so Hannah, when we collaborate, we can do seemingly impossible things, like print solar panels in Australia.
Yep, I can help.
Almost like paper.
Would you like that?
We can make these solutions.
Yes.
And why is this so important? Because there are thousands of people employed in industries that will go away, in the fossil industries. But those people can be retrained to manufacture solutions like this, not just for our energy future, but for the whole world. And if you're going to study science, I want to talk to you afterwards because we need you.
We can keep that conversation. Hannah.
Although we could get Hannah into politics, that seems like maybe her other option.
I'm not selling my soul yet.
I hope that does give you some hope. Thank you so much for that, Hannah. That's all we have time for. It's gone so quickly. Fantastic questions tonight. A great conversation. Please thank our panel, Larry Marshall, Jenny McAllister, Hannah Diviney, Warren Mundine and Sarah Hanson-Young. Please thank them. The great thing about Q&A is that it starts with the cue, it starts with the questions. So thank you for your questions and thanks for the input as well beyond the questions tonight and sharing those stories with us. Thank you at home as well for watching and joining in the conversation. Next week, we're back in Melbourne and for a look at increasing global economic uncertainty and growing tensions between China and the US, and hopefully we can navigate our way through that to give you something to look forward to as well. You can join me on Monday for China Tonight. Until then, have a good night.